Oh, no, it is working. There we go. Sorry. I'm Emma Macey, and I am Director of Strategy at Queenwood. My background's actually in visual arts, so I was a head of art for a very long time at a big boys' boarding school in the UK. And the other role that I had there was designated safeguarding lead. So I worked with children if there were critical cases, right from something happening in the school or the boarding house through to if it went to court. Okay, and so as part of that role, I sat on a thing called the Multi-Agency Services Hub, which works with, I was the independent schools rep working with police and health and all those sorts of agencies to make sure that policy was actually helpful in practice and we were doing things right. So that's my background, I suppose, in pastoral care. And then coming to Australia, I moved into admissions and communications during COVID. So slightly sort of broad activity there. I still work as a year coordinator. So I've gone from a boys' boarding school to a girls' day school as a year coordinator. So we see kind of different issues there, which has led to this project really. Yep. Okay. Oops, I'm going backwards. I need to go forwards. There we go. So this is where Queenwood is. We are a very fortunate school. We're in a beautiful place in Balmoral in Sydney. We do, though, have issues like any school. So we have our own things that we have. We have about 600 girls in the senior school across 3 campuses, which are sort of dotted around the beach there. The girls walk between. We've got a really high ICSIA level, right? So we're sort of top out there. About 70% of our parents are from professional categories. We are not a selective school, however. Okay, so we have very, very high expectations of our students, and we tend to have sort of both working parents as well. We tend to get very good results. Last year, when I was Year 12 coordinator, we had 61% had an ATAR over 90. The average IB score was sort of 96.5 and similar for the HSC as well. So really good results, even though we're non-selective. But I spent most of last year filling out educational access scheme applications. So for those who are not familiar with what that is, if you have been diagnosed with something like anxiety or depression, you can put in and say, I've had adverse circumstances, and therefore that gets reflected when it goes to uni and they take that into consideration. We had about 15% of the year, maybe a little bit more pre-COVID, post-COVID, those students coming back who'd forgotten how to sort of live in a communal atmosphere, a bit like what Tim McDonald was talking about this morning. They really struggled. So we had almost over 50%. That's not all anxiety or mental health conditions. You have sort of the usual sort of divorces and bereavements and those sorts of things, but it was very high. So I started thinking, well, you know, I have just spent a good amount of my time filling out paperwork. And this was about when the government was saying, well, we're going to put a whole lot of money into hiring school psychologists to go into schools because this has become an epidemic. And the question then is, well, why are we treating the symptoms? What's the cause?
And can I just jump in as well and say that in Sydney we have this annual tradition when ATAR, and HSC results come out, as the Sydney Morning Herald calls up schools about, something that is not related to HSC, and then sneaks a question in about how many provisions we get for anxiety, because that's the kind of data they would love to be able to publish if they could. So what we've done is really taken an approach that instead of sort of going down that path of going down this sort of disability path, we would like to actually nip some of this stuff in the bud so that those really high levels of applications are not necessary, but also the independent sector has the highest dropout rate in university. So that's the sort of downside, that they've got this leg up all the way through for various issues. A lot of it is academic stress. And so we're taking this sort of opposite approach, we're trying to bring that down instead.
And also to talk about it, that's been really valuable. So the Sydney Morning Herald publishes it, and everyone sort of tries to hide that because we're fee-paying schools and we think that that has a certain kind of, effect on enrolments and the way that we're perceived. But actually, when you speak to schools, that's pretty normal. I spoke to a lot of different schools. I also spoke to the Mental Health Commissioner of New South Wales. We spoke to AIS, and that was really common. Okay, when I first applied for a grant through the AIS at support.
In New South Wales, the Association of Independent Schools.
Yeah.
You've got a different.
Yes, okay, yeah, so we applied for support and funding to be able to do something about this with them. We were looking at the Mental Health Commission data from pre-COVID, and it was about 38% of students were reporting that it was school or study stress was the primary cause of their anxiety. Okay, so if you look at wellbeing programs, which I'm involved in delivering, they are usually things like extensions of the PDHPE syllabus or a response to what parents are saying they need. So it tends to be we're required to think about sleep and nutrition and relationships and online behaviour and body dysmorphia and just anything that might happen with an adolescent. But if you ask the adolescent, the top thing is school, right? And that's not surprising. They spend a lot of time at school, and if you sit in a classroom and feel incapable for the whole day and you look around and think everybody else is getting this, that has a huge impact on your self-confidence and your well-being. And that's what we wanted to address. Since that's happened, the data has got, I keep going backwards, it's got even worse. Okay, so this came out just this year. We're now up to 66%. Okay, of students are saying the primary trigger for their anxiety is school or study problems, mostly tests. Okay, 5 times more common in girls, which makes sense when you look at sort of research around girls in particular. Okay, so girls are very empathic. They're attuned to that sort of intrinsic messaging. And there is really good research saying that people who are trying to help step in and do it for a child. Okay, so I'm going to get the tutor. I'll do your study program for you. I'm going to, set up when your assessments are due and tell you. I'm going to write that essay plan for you. And what that child hears every time, I can't do this myself. You think I can't do this myself. So really well-meaning adults, and it can be teachers as well, thinking they're offering support and trying to help, and actually what they're doing is saying, you are not capable. So this is a real effort to say, to teach them some strategies, to say, you can do this. Look, this works, and you're able to do it yourself. Okay, so to make them responsible for their own learning, and then the evidence is that if they feel that sense of autonomy, okay, then they're going to feel like they're more capable and more autonomous and more able to act. And we're hoping that follows through to university and we don't have those dropout rates as well. Okay, this project has become really important even more so recently. So if you look at the review of the National School Reform Agreement, there were sort of 2 things really in there that were outstanding that we're not meeting the targets. Okay, so one of them was the Indigenous support for students. The other one was wellbeing. Okay, so there's a lot of talk about literacy and numeracy, and they're actually now going, well, we need to look at the wellbeing as well. So if a student isn't in class to start with, if they're not focused and engaged, there's no point having a brilliant teacher at the front delivering brilliant literacy lessons if no one's there, physically or mentally, if they're thinking about something else. Okay, so focus is the first thing. What's interesting is the sort of wording of it, so I'm going to read you a little bit. It makes schools really more accountable. So it says you need to promote wellbeing. Many children and young people struggle with poor wellbeing because of experiences in and outside of their schools, and we need to help and manage these students with their issues to achieve potential, and there is going to be improved performance reporting. Okay, so Australian, state and territory governments should commit to standalone reporting on progress against the next school reforms agreement sub-outcomes and targets. So we're going to have to report on wellbeing and say how we're supporting it. Okay, so this has been interesting for us to think, well, what are the components of wellbeing and how do you track it?
I think too, just from a marketing perspective in the independent sector, I think schools in the past have been able to kind of show off how much support they give for, mental health. So it would be a great thing to have 6 counsellors. Whereas if you start reporting on actual wellbeing outcomes, you want to really be able to say we only need 1 counsellor. So I think that sort of culture around wellbeing potentially will shift as a result of that, because all the add-ons that you had before, you might have to look a bit more critically about, you know, how many different external presenters you get in over the year and whether they're actually making an impact, because someone's looking at that. You know, so whereas before it was just like almost like a marketing tool, look how extensive and broad our program is. Now it's going to be, well, how are you actually shifting the needle on that? I think it might be a cultural shift as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we really need to move away from well-being being a substitute for, oh, well, we're just doing case management. Okay, so case management is not well-being. Okay, well-being is really proactive steps that you're taking to make sure the culture of your school is conducive to learning. And if we think about what Tim McDonald was saying this morning, really that starts with going, well, what are the behaviours of the teachers and the students, and how do we get them there? What are the things that we need? Well, if we want them to be independent, we don't do it for them. Okay, how do we get there? So we're a little bit sort of, I've done it again, earlier on in our journey than where Churchy is. So it's Churchy, when I saw your thing this morning, we're about where you were in 2019. So we are starting out, we're testing, we're in a pilot scheme at the moment, and we've placed it with tutors. But already initially we're seeing a little bit what you did, which is while the tutors are delivering it, you're really seeing impact in the classroom through developing a shared vernacular. So I'll pass over to Rebecca in a minute.
Mic myself.
Yeah. But that is the study that we are engaged in.
And we've got time while we're miking for you to just have a quick think, pair, share about what academic stress looks like in your context, and we're going to ask you in a minute or so. Thanks. So up is...
Yeah, go up.
Okay. I should probably stand here so I can see. We're good for time, yeah. All right, we'll just get you to listen up when you're ready, and I might ask a couple of people to share. I know just a few names, so I'm going to draw on the people I know. Luke, what does it look like in your context?
Can I say, coming from HSC and then coming to Queensland, I nearly wish there was a little bit more academic stress.
I see. Yeah.
The system does. There's so much hand-in work.
Yes. Okay.
It's so different. Mm-hmm. We still have boys that are obviously triggered by particularly exams because they don't do them too often.
Yep.
So what does that look like? Well, particularly after COVID, school refusal has jumped.
Yes.
And we're definitely seeing that.
I think kids, I read something the other day that said that kids discovered if they just say, no, mum, I'm staying home, that they could stay home. Like COVID sort of did that to their, kind of view of the reality of the world, is if you refuse, there's not much that a mother can do or a father can do for a 17-year-old boy who doesn't want to come to school. So it's a big sort of paradigm shift, I think, in how kids think about school now as optional. It's really worrying. Belinda, the other name.
I was just sharing about the primary context. I think it's very similar. There's a lot of learned helplessness, there's school refusal, there's test anxiety, and there's a bit of a misconception around how high stakes some of our regular testing processes are for both the families. That feeds into the lives of the children. They feel a lot of, unnecessary concern around what that process is gathering.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, it's helpful to know that if there is a reaction, it's evidence that we need to dig a little deeper on why that child's feeling so incapable of participating in that assessment task or that test. So So,
yeah, thank you. We presented down at Sharing Best Practice when the project had just started, and because it's very primary focused around reading and things like that, we thought we wouldn't have anyone in the room. And we had a room similar size to this, all full of upper primary teachers who said we're seeing it younger and younger, and they were coming to hear, well, what are high schools doing about it? They were really curious. So our...
Some anxiety is normal.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, absolutely.
To be stressed about, and if you're stressed because you haven't prepared, well,
yeah,
that's a learning opportunity. It doesn't have not to be something that has to be now. You've got
definitely.
It's like, yes, you got anxiety because you didn't do the work.
And some of the case management I've noticed involves enabling avoidance. So you don't feel able to do the test, so you don't have to. You can do something else, and that means they don't get to practice. It makes it worse.
Yeah. So, I mean, just as a slight aside, we've got principles around wellbeing that we explicitly say to staff we don't use medicalised language. So things like, naming, well, how do we talk about wellbeing? I'm not saying that every staff member has adopted that at all, but at least it's on paper somewhere, and it's an expectation that we don't jump straight to that as well. So it's almost, part of it is like how you approach it as a school, and there are definitely, as you go through any kind of change management process or professional learning process, you see some of the cracks and you see other areas where it falls down. So that's probably the topic of another talk. So our program is structured in a similar way to the program by Churchy is structured, but we are measuring a bunch of wellbeing indicators rather than academic outcomes. That was the nature of the grant, and I think that was part of the reason why we got the grant, is because there's not a lot of research in this space about that sort of relationship between those two things. I think if it had been on outcomes, we probably wouldn't have generated as much interest in the project. So we have taken we've designed 8 outcomes based on the book How Learning Happens. There's a chapter in there on how independent learners become independent, which is not by just practicing being independent. And we've got 8 different, bits of terminology, but we're working towards making sure the students understand what that terminology means as well. And the study comes from a small school, but a similar ICSIA school, where they studied the kinds of ways boys talk about assessment, all right, and looking at which of those boys were more successful around their study, and how do we separate this into a set of factors that are going to influence that. Because we have a team that is a fairly large team for a project like this, we have a team of about sort of between 6 and 9 people at any one time. Some are involved in resourcing, some are involved in just the research aspect. A lot of those people are in a pastoral leadership role, and a lot of heads of departments. So to get sort of like buy into the project as well, and to look at it in a holistic way in relation to wellbeing, we couldn't just have necessarily skills. We had to show part of the program has to be about those behaviours that enable those skills to happen in the first place. So things like organising and planning, I would say that's you can give scaffolds around that and you can teach around that, but a part of that is behavioural, part of that's about motivation as well. Environmental structuring is something that happens in the home, and it's probably something that's more traditionally been in the wellbeing space. But we've got science of learning principles around the skills and a very structured way of delivering that particular content. So the book, which you probably know already, is this book, How Learning Happens. It's been really instrumental for staff to do their professional reading around that and have some ownership over that research. I've sort of split those outcomes into 2 separate groups here. This is all the stuff that would fall into the wellbeing space. So you've got a bunch of people then who really want to put their hand up and bring some rigour to that through direct teaching, and they're the pastoral people of the team. And then the academic skills, this is broken into a lot more skills than what's on there, but we've got the people on the more academic side looking at how to structure those particular skills, making sure they're in proper lessons as close as possible to an I do, we do, you do model, and with time for practice. We're still sort of nutting out, logistically how that works. It's been a bit of a challenge. So what happens in our particular school is we've re-timetabled the school to accommodate this. So the girls stay in a theatre after assembly, and they stay back and they get basically a lecture style presentation. There's a bit of participation in it, but because we've only got 20 minutes a week, it has to be fairly explicit. And we've got a student advisory who have said that lecture style is really boring, but we know it's the best way for us to learn this stuff. So I was like, oh, it's like music to my ears, you know, that it's okay to just be sitting and listening, and you're there for 20 minutes. If you had, you know, kind of logistical travel time between venues, if you had it delivered by, you know, tutors with varying levels of enthusiasm, you wouldn't get that sort of real direct message, and not everyone would get the same message at the same time. So we do consult with the students, and we also feed back to them on what we can and can't change. So they'll give us a set of feedback, and I'll get up and say, I can do this, this and this, I can't do this for this reason. So that's been a productive relationship
and
as well.
They've come full circle. So the first round they were like, well, we want our tutors to deliver it, and we need smaller groups, and we need, you know, all these things, and then we do it, and they go, oh no, that didn't work, can we have the lectures back?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, happy days. So we have engaged the girls in the research behind why memory works the way it does and why forgetting works the way it does. When we originally had Churchy as a critical friend, they said the boys don't dig it. They just want to know what the skills are. They're like, tell me what I need to do and I'm going to do it and I'm going to get out of here. However, I think with girls you have maybe like a bit more of a credibility issue. By default, I think girls, you know, are sceptical the minute you stand up in front of them, especially I was a new person as well, so they didn't know me from, you know, their elbow. And so we have engaged them just a little bit in the research, and I don't think they can necessarily do anything with this information, but they do understand that it's based on sound, you know, cognitive science, right? So I think that is where potentially we get the buy-in. One of the problems with this program is that every kid thinks they know how to study already. They say, well, I know what a flashcard is, and they go, oh, you know, but so why are you telling me about flashcards again? Or I know that. What was another thing? I know what a brain dump is, and they have no idea why it works, and they do lean on their, you know, usual practices. So we come back to this again and again. This is Dunlosky's work around what's high, medium, and low utility, and we keep coming back to it. And we'll come. It's almost like a sort of learning intention. So we'll blank out everything on there except for the thing we're doing on that particular day, and it's just a little reminder. So, classic first day, we said, okay, so, you know, like a mentee or something, who does summarising for their study? And they're all really proud and put their hands up. They're like, yes, I do that. That's all I do. And then who does highlighting? Oh, yeah, I totally do highlighting. We're like, okay, well, good. I'm glad you don't know anything because now we've got something to teach you. So we come back to this really often. So we've got a few different resources that they've got a workbook which they love because it's beautiful as well. Girls like beautiful things. And we have a OneNote. We have a few different methods. We're experimenting with program delivery, like video and things like that as well, to try a few things just to see how they land, I guess, because we're in pilot mode as well. We're mainly lecture style, but we do go back to, you know, other modes and just get a bit of feedback and see how that works. And we're still experimenting a little bit. But the other thing that I'm excited to share with you, but something we've also shared with the girls, is that we share our study results with them. So we draw on a wide range of wellbeing indicators, so not just academic stress, so where we get indicators around autonomy support, even indicators around how explicit the instruction is, motivation, all different types of motivation. And we'll occasionally present, okay, if we get a new set of data, we'll say, this is you. All right, so we can see that you've got pretty low intrinsic motivation. And you might always have low intrinsic motivation because it's possible that study isn't fun, and that's okay. Like, we've got a lot of teachers on staff who are studying. We didn't find it that fun either. You know, so it takes a long time to be the kind of learner where you're like, I cannot wait to do my flashcards. And we said, look, that's all right, because you've got this up here, your identified motivation is really quite high, so you care about what comes next. You know, you want to be a doctor, you want to be, you know, you want to get into university, you want to be able to go out and help people, you want a career, and maybe you want to make a lot of money, and your identified motivation is quite high. Extrinsic is quite high as well. And your feelings of shame, I'd say this is introjectives like feelings of shame and fear, so the kind of thing that gets you in the gym when you don't really feel like it. That's sort of, you know, up there, not terrible. But they find this kind of stuff really interesting, and they know they're being monitored, which I think is they're seeing that there's a whole structure happening behind them. We've had really good shifts in planning, so it's a bit hard to read. Not many shifts in anything else on those particular indicators, but really good movement on the planning side of things. and self-regulation. And the biggest correlation, or the only correlation in the whole suite of measures, has actually been between explicit instruction and autonomy support. So when I first, I had a lot of, conceptual struggle with that at first, because I was thinking all the literature around autonomy is about choice and freedom and how teachers, kind of conduct themselves in front of the class, do what you like, pick from whatever you choose. But there's actually a really strong body of research that links those two things, that you cannot get to autonomy without that support. So it's like, what is that sort of, a transition point where they're ready to go? Like as a teacher, I really struggle with when to take the training wheels off. But that has been the biggest shift of all the data, is actually this link between explicit instruction in study skills and autonomy support. That's only over one term. So we've got enough to report on based on that, really just that one measure is, reportable. And the feedback from them supports that as well. That I think they don't know as much as that Dunning-Kruger thing, right? So they didn't know as much as they thought they would know. And we are shifting the needle on those. So in terms of what's next for us, so we've got a choice between bringing Year 8 in or taking 10s to 11. So our ethics approval is vague enough that we could do either, which is in hindsight a great thing to have done. We're looking at how do we potentially embed it within the curriculum. So we've had a really strong and osmotic uptake of these strategies by teachers. We haven't asked them to do anything with them. We've just given the girls the skills, and we've seen, especially heads of department, have taken the initiative to, ask their staff to try things. And probably the do-nows, like the, walking in and having a lesson ready that's based on retrieval, a lot of teachers have done that they just fundamentally kind of just believe in it. They're like, we want to start the learning, as cleanly as possible. And their memories have been improving, and it sets a tone for the start of the lesson. So that's been a real surprise because it wasn't the intention of the project. We're looking at whether the tutor's more involved. So we've got tutors who look after a group of about 15 girls, and the levels of enthusiasm vary wildly. Like if you graphed it would be like this. And so it makes it really difficult to seed that knowledge out to tutors and have them run with it, because some girls might get no instruction and other girls might get the world's best instruction. So it's really difficult to know how to get buy-in with that group, because they almost don't see it as part of their job either way. So
it's a bit of a lottery this time. So we didn't realise we had the funding until we'd already got the tutors organised, and you need to scatter the, high ability and more disinterested staff amongst the year groups, just to make it easier on those year coordinators. But for next year, we're really asking staff to express an interest, or who are interested in this stuff, to be on those year groups. So I think we'll see how that shifts it.
And we've got several staff. We've got 9 staff on a master's scholarship. So the school pays the gap for this. They've got a Commonwealth supported place, and the school pays the gap. And we're looking at how to support people to use that data for their own. They've got a project-based subject, and how do we leverage the project so that they can use that data in their projects, or do something additional, or make sure that their study aligns with the school's goals as well. So looking at how do you and a lot of these people are kind of bought in already. They're all, or they wouldn't have probably applied for the scholarship. But yeah, we're looking at how to, leverage the whole project a bit more and get a little bit more ownership around sort of certain content areas, which has worked well in the past. We sort of forced the team to present on a certain area to staff at the start of the year, and they were given a curated set of research materials or papers, and they had to present to the whole staff. So that was a really good way of pushing it forward with a sort of reasonable knowledge base from the team itself, because this is definitely not something that is covered in early teacher education, so none of us would have learned, I doubt it. Like, I put up your hand, is anyone going to put their hand up and say they learned this? I didn't. So we're starting from a knowledge base of, not very much, and a lot of teachers still consider it like an extra thing rather than a sort of normal part of teaching, review and things like that. Yeah.
But I think what has been the really valuable thing, in a lot of schools, I think the wellbeing or pastoral care team is considered here and the academic team here, and really being very clear about the relationship between both has been really important. So
yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. We're around for questions at lunch or whatever. Just come up. Yeah, thank you. That's good. Is workshop 3 like now?
Yes.
And that's my laptop, isn't it? Yeah. That clicker was good, actually.
It is. It's
It
the
actually
one I got
worked.
at the.
Oh, it's yours.
Yeah, it's mine.
Oh,
I got it as a
should get one.
gift.
Oh, yeah.
So we walked out with that. Thank you. Looking forward to yours.